Okay. Which you go on first?
Hello.
Yeah, I'll go on second.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. How many of you are joining us for the first time this evening? Oh, wow, a bunch of you. Well, welcome. The Center for Fiction is a 200-year-old cultural nonprofit whose mission is to encourage people to read and value fiction and to support and celebrate its creation and enjoyment. And we do this through public events like this one, reading groups and writing workshops, all offering vibrant, accessible, and inclusive programs that welcome a wide community to experience the joy of story. Our Kids Read program offers immersive reading experiences for children, and we support early career writers with their first novel prize and our Emerging Writers Fellowship. Visit our site, sign up for our mailing list, and then follow us on social media. And to support our work creating a home for readers and writers here in Brooklyn, please consider becoming a member so you're tuned into all of our activities and come back and see us soon. For example, next Thursday, October 10th, we will be hosting Argentinian horror writer Mariana Enriquez. For tonight, a few logistics. After the talk, we will have a Q&A, and if you're here in the room, please raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone to you so that the guests on the live stream can hear you. And for those of you who are joining us via live stream, you can type your question in the chat at any time. Um, Deborah was kind enough to pre-sign your books, and we'll be doing a personalization line after the event, just on the other side of this wall. We'll come back with instructions about that. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce a writer of dizzying talent and extraordinary skill, whose work means so much to so many people. Here to talk about the position of spoons and other intimacies, Deborah Levy, joined by the beloved author of the forthcoming novel, Audition, Katie Kitamura. Please give them a big hand.
Thank you so much, Melanie, and thank you to all of you for being here. I'm so excited to be here with truly peerless Deborah Levy to celebrate her new book, The Position of Spoons. Sorry, can you hear me a bit more now? All right, thank you. I think Deborah will read a very short segment from the book, and then we'll talk for a bit, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me okay? Yes. And thank you for your warm welcome. My big thanks to my publishers, FSG, to the Center for Fiction. I'm going to read just half a page from a roaming alphabet of the inner voice. L is for love. On Tuesday evening at 7:50 p.m., John and I went to see the film AI, Artificial Intelligence, by Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick. We sat next to each other in the dark, close but separate. The film was about a robot boy made in a laboratory who was special because he was programmed to be able to love. His adopted mother grew frightened of her robot son's affection and abandoned him in the woods. Years later, the robot boy is discovered at the bottom of a frozen river by strange and beautiful creatures that are artificial life. They have tall, thin bodies similar to the figures in early cave paintings, and they are very respectful to the robot boy. They realize he is their last contact with human beings because it was a human who programmed him. I don't know what happened next, except that John was drinking a can of lager and I had shut my eyes. I had shut my eyes because I realized John and I were artificially in love. We were the artificial intelligence who needed to find the robot boy because he was programmed to love. he had something inside him that we needed to be inside ourselves.
Deborah, thank you so much. It's extraordinary to hear you read that. On my way here on the bus, I ran into a friend and I tried to describe this book, and I realized if I said it was about Colette and lemons and car crashes and heartbreak, it would still not kind of communicate how incredibly wide-ranging it is, both in terms of subject matter but also form. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the process of putting this book together.
So it's uncollected writing.
Yes.
So I've been writing for a long time now, and I have a lot of it. And when I wanted to put some of it together, so there's a lot of writing that isn't in this book. I thought it was a bit like, you know, how you arrange your cutlery drawer. The spoons go there and the knives go there, and then sometimes they get mixed up a bit, and the forks and where the spoons are supposed to be. So this was in my mind, and I had a short story called The Position of Spoons, so I decided that would be the title, and it would hold this collection. I didn't want it to be chronological, so for example, there's some work is 20 years old, and some is 3 years old. I didn't want to kind of go, no, I just want the last 10 years of work, although that will happen. And then I guess that line from Simone de Beauvoir's memoir, Memoir of a Dutiful Daughter. I'm a little bit jet-lagged, so now and again, if you could fill in these things for me. There's a line that I found so encouraging when I first read it. She says, be loved, be necessary, be someone, be admired. And so the writers and artists who I discuss in these books, I love them. I think they're necessary. I think they're someone, and I admire them. And I think they made a play for all of those things. And I love that line, be loved, because it's kind of preposterous in a way, you know, but so necessary. So that was something that organized the way that I put the book together.
I mean, one thing that really struck me is that if I collected things I've written over 20 years, they would feel very shaggy about the sides. And this book has a true unity to it. It feels, it has a kind of integrity to it. It feels like your voice is kind of there from 2000 to 2020 or whenever it is. It has a kind of, it's of a piece. And I wondered, you know, you're one of the great writers of time and the kind of confrontation with the former self and the present self. I wonder if you could share a little bit about what the experience of going through these older pieces was like.
Thank you. It is odd, actually, to read something that you've written 20 years ago and say, no, I think that. I mean, there are pieces that I've written 20 years ago that aren't in this book. I mean, that has to be said. I was just reading there was a copy of my first novel, Beautiful Mutants, on the table, and I opened that up, and that's about a female banker who sets fire to London Zoo, and why. And I read this line, she draws up in her car and she buys, it says, 100 gallons of petrol. I thought, really? So that was very much, you know, I can see myself writing that book. I'm in silver platform boots, I've got a sort of eyeliner flick and lots of mascara, and I'm pounding the typewriter, 100 gallons of petrol. So, um, so the work that was written 20 years ago seem to me, and I hope that you might agree, it seems to be kind of laying the trail for the work that I was going to write later. I can see it in that work, and so I've put it in. Yeah.
I wonder if the book opens with this really extraordinary, almost flurry of short texts about some writers who are very important to you, many of them female writers and artists. So there's kind of Colette, there's Marguerite Duras, Francesca Woodman, Lee Miller. And I wonder if you could, I mean, you talked about kind of reading Simone de Beauvoir and finding the kind of courage or something, but it felt to me one of the great joys of reading this book is that we get to be with Deborah as she is reading these extraordinary writers, and we can kind of see your reactions not simply to the text, but also to how they are inhabiting the role of the artist. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that constellation of writers that you place at the very front of the book.
Yeah. I mean, Octavia Butler, I got to write myself in.
Yeah.
That's one that's
yeah.
You know, it's such a great line, she said. And I felt those writers wrote themselves in because they'd been written out. So with Colette, the French writer, do I even have to say that? I don't think
I don't know. I think maybe not in this room.
I fell in love with her before I read any of her books. To my teenage eyes, smeared in the black coal I believed made me look nihilistic and wasted. It was the era of punk after all, and we were all in mourning for the future. Colette had a sort of self-possessed kind of beauty that I felt she owned and hired to the photographer. So, you know, I'm sort of, you're right, I'm kind of starting there. And then I go into, the writing itself. And then I go into that sense of being a stranger in Britain, because I happen that the narrator finds a photograph of Colette. She's 14. And so I was born in South Africa, and I'd been, is it 6 years in Britain? And I was trying to put myself together, you know, and she seemed like perhaps the way to go. And it's totally superficial. It's not just her work. It's that she looks a bit like a movie star, but she's a writer with purpose. She's an intellectual, and she's got a cat. And the cat's on the desk with her, and I thought, that's perfect.
One of the writers who also appears in the book quite prominently, in fact, is JG Ballard.
Yes.
I wonder, it seems like there's a piece that's not, I mean, I don't know if it shouldn't be categorized maybe, but it has a kind of formal experimentation, and then there's also a piece that is more directly maybe a work of criticism about Ballard. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Ballard, because I was very struck. You say something about how I think I even wrote it down, you say that you felt an affinity with him. You say, I was just starting to write, but Ballard made me feel less lonely. And I wonder if you could share the importance of his work.
Yes, yeah. So the book has sort of, what would you say, essays. It's got 2 short stories, and this is quite a substantial essay. Yes. Are you familiar with the work of JG Ballard? Yeah. So the late, great JG Ballard, whose every book I looked forward to. When they came out in hardback, in my younger days, and they were so expensive to buy, I used to try and review them so that I would get a copy. Until the editor at one paper said, you know, Deborah, I think we need to give the next Ballard to someone else. Because, so I cut my teeth as a reviewer, as a critic, actually, on Ballard, just so I could get his books. But he was, he started off as a science fiction writer, and then kind of became, he was a novelist of ideas. He could embody ideas like no one else. He said something really interesting. He said, it took me 25 years to forget the past and 25 years to remember it. And his influences were my influences. There was cinema, psychoanalysis, surrealism, and contemporary culture. And there were not very many British writers at that time who had that sort of medley of influences, and they were mine too. So I felt less lonely. And he also, there was a kind of manifesto that he wrote. I believe. One of the things he believed, he said, I believe in the beauty of all women and the treachery of their imaginations. So close to my heart. And it was somehow encouraging to think, well, we have treacherous imaginations. So I read all his books. So an idea, when I say he embodied an idea, in his book, his novel, Cocaine Nights, he writes, he wanted to find out what kind of personality would survive the 20th century. And in his view, it was the psychopath. And so he creates this character called Bobby Crawford, who's a tennis coach, shiny teeth, very fit and ripped, and always smiling and happy to teach you the game. But he's also an arsonist and a really dangerous character. So that fascinated me, that's a good way in to writing novels.
You also say about Ballard, sorry to
Yes.
read you back to you, but
Yes.
perhaps most significantly, we shared the dislocation of not being born in Britain.
Yes.
Home was the imagination. Ballard was going to make worlds we had not seen before in British fiction. We were talking a little bit upstairs about how the French are very eager to claim you as one of their own. And I wondered if you could write a little bit about this dislocation and also maybe share what your relationship is with the tradition of English fiction.
Yeah. So well, that's such a complicated question.
It's a nested monster with like 3 questions in it.
So, in my teens, I was reading D.H. Lawrence, I was reading Tolstoy, Garcia Marquez, Edna O'Brien, The Country Girls, I remember that. The revelation of that, actually. At school, we had a librarian, an Irish librarian, and she had a liking for European literature, which was, especially French literature, which was very hard to get in translation. And so she kind of got that I was a voracious reader, and she would put all these books under my nose. And so I grew up on Colette, on Camus, on Marguerite Duras. I don't even at the time, I didn't think, I'm reading French writers. I was just reading great writing that thrilled and inspired me. If I look back on that now, I can say, well, they were modernist writers. They packed a lot into a sentence. There's a kind of simplicity, there's a surface that appears to be quite light. And and a depth that's very deep. And that was something that I was going to develop as a novelist. I was really going to play with surface and depth, because nobody is entirely clever and nobody is entirely stupid. So you might as well play with surface and depth.
Could you say more about how you do that in your novels?
Okay, so in my novel Swimming Home, the first line is something like, when Kitty Finch told Joseph she loved him, he no longer knew if they were having a conversation or if she was threatening him. So you pack in something, this idea that you can use love to threaten someone. So that's this idea that you could have two contradictory things going on in one sentence.
Yeah.
I guess that was from my early reading. And it's something that a writer like Muriel Spark does exceptionally well. She sort of puts a note of panic into a very simple sentence. A shop assistant can just say something really quite weird. And but apparently very simple. I took note of that.
Can I ask you about this idea of dislocation and how, having been born in South Africa, being brought up from a quite young age in England, and then now you split your time between Paris and London, how that theme kind of manifests, or how that experience rather manifests in your writing?
I think about it a lot as I get older, like exactly that question. That, and I know that it's something that you also explore in your own distinguished work. So the cultural theorist Stuart Hall said something about identity. He said any kind of discussion about identity is a long, unfinished conversation. And I think that's right. And if my books have something in common, they all are long, unfinished conversation about that dislocation. And I don't know what else to say about it, except that they've somehow, I write the way I do because of that dislocation. I'm really interested in a writer like Annie Ernaux and her book The Years, which is a kind of social autobiography of France, of her generation of France. And she doesn't use I, the first person, she uses we. We watched these television programs, we wore these clothes, we ate this food, kind of thing. And I think that I could never really use the we. Like, not for Africa, not for Britain. I couldn't, I would feel I would not feel confident to use the we in that sense. And I feel very envious that she could, So someone like Walt Whitman, that's we, isn't it? It's sort of, it's so brilliant to be able to use it, but I can't.
I mean, that brings me to my next question, I think, which is you're one of the great writers of first person, and in particular with the trilogy, the Cost of Living trilogy, you've written or kind of remade the autobiography as a form. And I wonder if you could, I was very struck by the fact that you use a living autobiography, which is the kind of little subtitle that you give to those books.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about autobiography as a form and what it offers you as a writer. Because I when I read them, I didn't think of them necessarily as autobiography, but it's very deliberate, your choice of that word.
Yeah. So when I started to write the first one in the series, Things I Don't Want to Know. That's the title no one can say. The things I don't want to know, or we don't want to know, there we go, I've used the we, is other things we know anyway. It's a bit like but I've sort of repressed, pushed down. So it's a bit like, you know, a love affair's over, but you don't want to know it. A bill has come in, you know what's inside it, but you don't want to know. But you know. That's the sense of that title. When I began to write it, I didn't know what I was writing. I didn't set out to write a memoir. And it was a kind of mashup of memoir, of travel writing, of gender politics, of philosophy. And I thought, holy smoke, I don't know what this is. So I would read it back at the end of the day, and I was interested in it. Sometimes we're not, right? And so I thought, okay, well, I'll just continue. And I was beginning to find the voice that was going to steer those 3 books. And they were written in the first person. So that's a very claustrophobic tense, the first person, to write in. It's so hard to do. And I began to get that the way out of that was to let in as many other subjectivities as I could. Right, so then I discovered that the I, the first person, which we think of, that voice has to have authority, and I wanted it to have intimacy, but I also wanted it to have formality and distance. So there's nothing binary about that I, you know. It has to do so many things. So I was finding the techniques to write in the first person in a way that was acceptable to me when I read the writing at the end of the day. I really had to learn it and teach myself. How do I do first person narratives? That was the thing, because there are plenty of them. So the first line of Things That I Want to Know is something like, that spring when life was very hard and I could not see where there was to get to, and I was at war with my lot. I seemed to cry on escalators, at train stations. I can't remember my lines. That's the sort of, and I thought, well, can you write that stuff? Is it even okay to write that? The title, the subheading was political purpose. So obviously I thought there was some political purpose in that apparently very kind of intimate and personal first line. But I knew it was a collective I as well. So on some level, so if the writer drills into the facts of lived experience, you'll come out the other side to somewhere quite surprising. And if it's any good, and with any luck, readers will sort of stand with the writer to look at the view. Some might just throw the book at the wall, obviously. So that was the beginning of it, and I called them living autobiographies. I made up those words. There's no such thing, because what was the genre, and did I care? By this time, I kind of knew I was onto something, that I would have to call them something. So living autobiographies meant that autobiographies seem to me to be kind of looking nostalgically at the past, a little bit over your shoulder. They seem to be written chronologically. These aren't. How could I write these in the present tense, in the storm of life kind of thing? So that's why they have that title. And as they get translated into other languages, living autobiography just won't translate. So, an editor said, no, it's as if the book is alive. And I said, well, that's a good thing, isn't it? But apparently literally alive, So like a living chair or something like that. So it's changed to moving, an autobiography in movement. So there are all these sort of translations of them.
I guess I had two thoughts. One of my absolute favorite pieces in this is your essay on Violette Leduc, which I think is a very kind of substantial. It's
Yes.
kind of sits alongside your Ballard essay.
Yes.
In a way, it's a very, very substantial engagement with this author's work. And one thing that you write about incredibly well is the quality of hyper-attunement in her, of almost hyper-attunement. Like there's the attention in her work of observation. It is you write about that very beautifully, and it strikes me that is what you do in your own work, is that you're observing with incredible precision, and that is what gives, to some extent, if I understand you correctly, the political dimension to the books, is in the observation of the day-to-day details of your life.
So Violette Leduc, I'd never heard of her when I was asked to write about her. So a French writer of many incredible books. In fact, Simone de Beauvoir had been one of her supporters. And when I was asked to write an introduction to her autobiography, that's a very interestingly written autobiography, I wasn't going to do it really until I read Simone de Beauvoir's, she's come up a lot, hasn't she? 1960 introduction. So she was someone who supported Leduc, but she had this sort of enraging line, which was, this autobiography is written as if no one is listening, whereas Leduc had actually sometimes addressed the reader in the style of Charlotte Bronte, dear reader. And I thought, well, come on, Simone. It's as if she felt she wasn't entitled to be listened to or something. So I thought, okay, I'm going to read it and I'm going to write the introduction. And I got very interested in how she declares how that she's bored with the past, that the past isn't really interesting. And so she works it in, but into this autobiography, but it's not chronological. Right, so if you were on the subway tonight or walking down the road, you might be thinking about something that happened 3 days ago or 12 years ago in the present tense of walking here. So that's sort of, so how do you honor simultaneous time in fiction and non-fiction without the narrative sort of collapsing? So I had to learn how to do that. And my novel, The Man Who Saw Everything, is the book that, that I reached for with that idea. So so then, because I'd written about Leduc, I kind of became her unofficial, unpaid publicist. Because everyone was asking me to write about Leduc. So I wrote about her again, and then that was it. But I recommend all her work.
The wonderful novelist Catherine Lacey wrote about real estate relatively recently in her Substack, I think, and she pointed out a passage that I absolutely that I remember from when I read the book, which is, again, apologies for reading your own work to you, but it's a moment when you discover a book that has a kind of inscription from the man who would become your ex-husband. And the passage says, it is about this confrontation with the younger self, and it says, "I knew she would not want to see me, so there you are, nearly 60 and alone, and I did not want to see her either, so there you are, 40 years old, hiding your talent, trying to keep your family together, but she and I haunted each other across time." I think you write about time in an absolutely extraordinary way, both in that novel and throughout your work. I'm always very moved, and I remember being moved when I read it by this description of yourself being 40 and hiding your talent. And it is a kind of theme in this book, I think. You have an essay about Elizabeth Hardwick, and you write a little bit about what it means for a female writer or artist to kind of occupy space. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and what happened in the interceding 20 years between your memory of yourself as hiding your talent and then to fully inhabiting your gifts.
Right. So I don't really know how to answer that. Maybe I'll talk about Elizabeth Hardwick instead.
Please.
So the Elizabeth Hardwick essay in this book is an introduction to her collected essays, Seduction and Betrayal, or is it Betrayal and Seduction? I am a bit jet-lagged. Seduction and Betrayal.
Yeah.
And she's such a devastating critic and reader, Elizabeth Hardwick. For a female writer to risk stepping center stage in life and on the page will always mean she has transgressed from the societally sanctified role of being a minor player, lurking behind the velvet curtains, less exposing, in order to assist, flatter, dedicate her life to the male world and its undermining arrangements. Hardwick had no interest in flattery, nor in faux solidarity with female writers. She cuts to the chase, offers her readers new dimensions as to how literature is made and what it costs to make it. So Hardwick is writing about Sylvia Plath. She's writing about the Bronte sisters. And that's very interesting because they actually sort of hide their talent from their brother Bramwell. So they all published, these three sisters. And their brother is a kind of drunk and he's depressed. And he's a painter. He's quite a good painter, but he doesn't keep at it. You know, he did paint the only portrait, actually, that we have of the three sisters. And she writes about that. And she's so good on the Bronte sisters. I'm trying to find... here's Hardwick, right? They are very serious, wounded, longing women, conscious of all the romance of literature and of their own fragility and suffering. They were serious about the threatening character of real life. And off she goes. So I discuss this. Her essay on Sylvia Plath is devastating. Zelda Fitzgerald, and so on. So that was written as an introduction to her book, but it seemed to fit into the sort of mood of the position of spoons.
You've mentioned that several of these pieces were commissions. I wonder if I find commissions very, very hard, and I feel like they very rarely produce work that I'm ultimately happy with. Many of these are commissions of introductions, but also I think created in an art context as well. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your reaction to the commission. Is it a kind of constraint that you find useful? Is it, in the case of Violette Leduc, it kind of opened up a writer for you?
So I'm quite a slow writer. So it'd be useless to sort of commission me to write something for tomorrow. Right? You're just not going to get it. So I look at the time length for delivery. That's very important to me, just to be totally practical about it. And I simply can't write about stuff that doesn't interest me. I can write about lemons and eggs. Eggs are so interesting because they like sculptures that are made inside the bodies of hens. I'll write about that. Lemons are so interesting because when I first came to Britain, my best friend at school used to have used to bring sandwiches with lemon curd. Is there lemon curd in America? Yeah. I was in Zurich recently, and when I said lemon curd, nobody knew what it was. So I'd never seen anything as exotic as lemon curd. It was sort of this yellow paste between the brown bread. And she was very religious, and she used to say grace before she ate her sandwiches. And I began to think of lemon curd and God as somehow entwined. So lemons become so that whole narrative of misunderstanding and dislocation. Lemons are a very good route to it.
To get, I see.
And eggs. So Sigmund Freud used to say he hated chicken, and he'd say, "Let the chickens live and lay eggs." So eggs are quite good as avatars for me to discuss some of Freud's ideas. So I like that route into writing. Was that your question?
I think that was. I love the answer, so I'm gonna try to claim credit for the question.
Commissions, yes. I've just been commissioned to write the inaugural essay called "Why the Novel Matters," and so I've just delivered that. And if you'd all come to London on the 24th of October, I will be reading from that at the South Bank Centre in the Purcell Room. So that commission, now that was a really slow write. I had about three weeks to do it, 4 weeks to just focus on that. And I can't give any of it away because it's not published yet. That's October, and I have to, the end of October, and I have to deliver it. But that was a very enjoyable commission because I realized how much I had invested in the subject, because at first I thought, okay, well, I'll have to think about it. I write novels. I don't like I don't like to be told how I should read a novel or the kinds of novels that anyone should write. So I'm just I was sort of quite lighthearted about it. And then I discovered that I really felt passionately about it. And so that's a commission.
You were just talking about feeling passionate about the novel. You have worked in so many different forms, of course, and you kind of came up in the theater.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about working across different forms and how that's affected your writing.
So I had a theatre training in that I was trained to write for the theatre, not to perform. And I think how that kind of influenced my prose writing is that in the theatre you learn to edit very quickly, because when you're in rehearsal and you've written a dud line and a really good actor, speaks your line and it dies in their mouth, you very quickly have your pen out there and then and write a better one. So as a result, I tend to edit. I really learn to edit quickly. And cadence is very important to me, and rhythm. So that's that one. In fact, I have a play opening in Zurich, and you can all come to that as well.
I love the invitations.
2024. So I had to kind of learn how to write for the theatre all over again. I hadn't written for the theatre for a long time, and that was such a pleasure. And then prose. Well, I think that's what I'm most invested in. Language gives me so much pleasure and purpose. It torments me, when I just can't reach for the sentences I need, and then you'd get them, And it's not just literary language that interests me, it's really everyday language. So one of the things about spending some time in Paris is I really miss the English language. Just the way someone says no. I miss that.
I think on that note, we could open it up to the audience, because I know so many of you will have questions for Deborah. And I think there's a mic that will be coming round.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a quick question. August Blue has a lot of Frozen references, as far as I could tell.
A lot of?
Frozen references. I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little. It's how I got my daughter to this reading.
That did come up with August Blue. And so the protagonist in August Blue is called Elsa, and she dyes her hair blue. So I had no reference to, when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking of Frozen at all. And this was a sort of narrative that came up with the book. But where you're right is that Elsa, the piano virtuosa in my book, who messes up, she's playing a piece of classical music at a concert, and she messes it up in her view. She's played it many, many times before, and she inserts into that music some of her own composition, right? She begins to play something that she has written, because that's been so shut down in her by her music teacher. Is she a performer? Is she a creator? These were sort of questions that came up in that book. So what we can say is Elsa really does need to let go. And what she has to let go in my book is so often a novel is about finding an identity, and Elsa in August Blue has to kind of lose an identity, and that's the story.
It seems to me that in many of your books, where you write is really significant. So that shack that you describe so beautifully, I just wonder where you write right now, in what space.
Oh, where I write?
Where, exactly.
Oh.
Because you do such an incredible job of evoking the physical spaces where you write. So I'm just very curious about the place.
So I write in a studio in Paris that's a bit like a barn that's been elevated up to the 5th floor of an old building. It's got old wooden beams. And that's where I mostly write. But if I had my way, I would write in a log cabin or a shed. I like being half inside, half outside, if you know what I mean. I like to write inside and to be able just to walk outside the door and for there to be trees and things going on with the bugs and that live in the tree, kind of thing. I think the importance of place, the cost of living, I guess you're referring to. I think that's the only book where the author writes is important, because it's what the author writes, how she writes, that's kind of more important. You know, I often think about diaries when beginner writers sort of show me these very pretty diaries that they are writing, and I say it's lovely, but actually you could just write in an exercise book as well. Don't put any production values into this diary with, you know, don't decorate it anymore at the moment. Just get into the writing, because most writing is really about stamina.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think almost, for me at least, it's psychological stamina, in the sense of you have to keep working on something that might fail, and you have to dedicate several years of your life without knowing if it will succeed.
That's
it's
so
quite
true.
wearing.
But nobody feels sorry for us.
No, nobody. Can I ask as a quick follow-up to that question? You mentioned when you live in Paris, you miss the sound of the English language. Has that changed your writing at all? Kind of writing in English surrounded by another language.
No, it's a good question. I don't think it has. Sometimes, because when I tour my books in France, I have a simultaneous translator, and I think I have to have a sentence in French that I speak, at least one. So my novel Hot Milk, I was trying to find, you know, a sentence that would describe Sophia, the 26-year-old narrator. So I said, elle est triste et forte. She is strong and sad. And that's, you know, so it's a bit like what I was saying before. You put two apparently opposing things into one sentence. I like that a lot. That's what I love about language. She is strong and she is sad. So one of the things that I feel quite strongly about in all my books is there's never one character that's immensely powerful, immensely successful. She can be immensely successful and powerful on Monday and quite vulnerable on Tuesday. So I don't have this sort of binary thing of strength and fragility, because I believe that we are all immensely powerful and immensely fragile. And to honor that in fiction is much harder than it sounds. But you'll never find, there's no book of mine where the coexistence of those things isn't present.
Hi, I'm Jasmine, big fan. This is nerve-wracking, honestly. But you had mentioned Annie Ernaux previously, and I recently read her A Girl's Story as well as Shame. And two things she mentions throughout both of those books are the idea of memory and what happens when you reread your work or have to come to terms with something that's happened, and you have this sort of moment of, wait, did it actually happen like that? And if so, who is there to validate that it happened the way that I'm remembering it? So I was wondering if for you there have ever been moments in which you reread your work or something that's already been printed, and you sort of have to take a minute to say, is this memory the same for all the parties involved? / how do you reconcile with sometimes feeling like you might not have put the most accurate description of something that's happened forward?
Yes, definitely. I mean, one of the odd things about writers before we do an event, sometimes we've chosen a page, and sometimes we're crossing out words because you realise that it flows a bit better. So that's an amazing thing about language. It's not a, it's alive. It keeps we keep moving with it. The books that I have on my shelves that have survived a marriage, friendships, and all of that are there because they're still lively within me. I know that's an odd way of answering your question. And of course, you turn to something in a book and you're reminded of that moment or that memory. But think about memories you have. They will keep changing because we keep editing and adding to memories, all through our lives. And no one is going to agree with your memory of your siblings. No, it didn't happen like that. Oh no, it happened like this. That's all a good thing in my view.
And we have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you so much. You're such a fabulous writer of clothes, not only of your own clothes, but of writers' clothes.
Could you speak into the mic?
Yeah, sorry. I should know better. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your answers. And because you've been so generous, I kind of just want to hear a little bit about sort of like a living, not autobiography, not inventory, but sort of just like a thinking aloud of your relationship to clothes in the present moment, especially because so many of my favorite essays in this most recent book are about your old creepers or about a sentence about the narrator of The Lover. You write, she decides to make something happen and starts to wear a man's fedora hat and gold lame shoes.
Yes.
I'm wondering, especially because all night I've just been admiring your pleats in which you are glimmering. Sort of, what are you wearing to make something happen, and what clothes are you keeping and putting aside?
So one of the things about writing novels is that all the characters go through costume and makeup. Right? Like that's who you are, and you're going to light it, and you're going to direct it, kind of thing. And so clothes are really important because they're kind of about how we create ourselves. And so I'm going to answer that in a literary way. There's an essay in this book called My Beautiful Brothel Creepers, which in Britain they were called teddy boy shoes. And when I got my first pair at 17, I thought I was destined for an exciting life, and that I'd escape from the suburbs of London, because often we want to unbelong as much as we want to belong. And I thought that they sort of marked me out for something. And then the narrator is in a sleepy English village, a very conservative English village. And she's waiting for a train, but the train's delayed. So she runs to the supermarket to get a sandwich, and there is the checkout person who is wearing a pair of brothel creepers, even more interesting and flamboyant than her own. And she knows, the narrator knows, that she will get out of that sleepy village and make a life that might please her. That's my hope for her, all told through shoes.
Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you, Deborah, for being
Thank you,
so
Katie.
generous.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Okay, so folks, there's books at the bookstore. Come on back in here after you've bought them and get in line to get them personalized. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you. You were so generous.